Okay. Will the May 19th, 2017 Legislative Committee meeting of the Contractor State License Board come to order? I am Dave Diaz. I'm filling in for committee chair for today's meeting. I'm not usually this, so. Only board members who are members of the committee may sit at the table. Other board members who are in attendance must observe from the audience. If a quorum of the board is present, those members who are observing cannot participate in the discussion. And I don't see anybody else out there, so I don't worry about that. Committee members Mike Layton, Johnny Simpson, and Nancy Springer have been excused for today. You want to check the quorum, please?
Dave Diaz?
I'm here.
Joan Hancock? Here. Ed Lang?
Here.
Paul Shafino?
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We will now do a committee members and staff introductions. Identification by members of the public is voluntary. Let's go from Kurt and then we'll work our way this way.
Good morning, everybody. Kurt Hepler, Supervising Counsel, Department of Consumer Affairs.
Paul Shafino, board member.
David Foe, Registrar.
I've already introduced myself.
Laura Zuniga, Chief of Legislation.
Ed Lang, board member.
Joan Hancock, board member.
Betsy Figuera, Legislative Division.
Rick Lopes, Chief of Public Affairs.
Okay, see, public, we'll start from over here, my left.
Ann Green, Contractor State License Board.
Sally Treadway-Egon, CSLB.
Alex Christian, CSLB.
Mike Maliza, Chief of Administration.
Lorena Yabut, CSLB. Marlene Munoz, CSLB.
Mike Janaski, CSLB.
Stacey Paul, CSLB. Debbie Stephan, CSLB. Bree Brewer, CSLB.
Jeff Corinne, General Contractor.
Ed Rieger, Indoor Comfort News.
Irene Coder Johnson, CSLB.
Craig Hampton, CSLB.
Jason Stoddard, CSLB.
Deb Lopez, CSLB Swift.
Yafana Lamar, Department of Consumer Affairs, Legislative and Regulatory Review.
Doug Galbraith, CSLB.
Rick Felucci, CSLB Northern Swift.
Blake Williams, CSLB.
Misty Hilborn, CSLB.
CSLB.
Richard Markison, Pacific Advocacy Group.
Natalie Watmore, CSLB. Ashley Caldwell, CSLB Public Affairs.
Thank you so much. Okay, now I'd like to take a moment away from the legislative issues to recognize the work of one of CSLB's employees in the personnel unit. Ann Green, could you join me up here, please? Yeah, might as well. What do we do about a microphone or whatever? Don't worry about it?
Just leave your mics on. You'll be
Okay, thank you. See, the only bad thing is I have to wear cheater glasses because I can't see this, and then if I look up, then I can't see anything else. So.
I have the same.
So sorry about that.
Just 1 second.
Ready? Okay. This has turned out to be a big week for Ann. On Wednesday, she was promoted from her staff analysis position to Associate Governmental Program Analysis. Congratulations.
Thank you.
This is a great achievement, but it's not the reason I've called you up here. Today, we wanted to recognize your assistance to the Enforcement Division with a special programming project, excuse me. You see, in addition to her other talents, and is apparently quite proficient with computers. And when she learned that the Enforcement Division was in need of assistance with the development of new report formats, she stepped right up to assist. As a result of Ann's great work, the new report forms were developed, programmed, and in place for our SWIFT units within weeks. The new reports have been getting rave reviews from our SWIFT investigators who complete the work, or who complete the forms, and from our district attorney partners who use them for prosecution. And on behalf of the board, I'd like to present you with this certificate of recognition. Thank you for your work as special project and being true to the CSLB team member.
Thank you very much.
And on a personal note, our union has been trying to redo our whole computer programming. Can you come and help? Because it's taken about 4 years, and we're still not there.
Well, thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much.
I should be that in post for a picture.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
If we want to do that now, Joan can lead us. Or you want to be
No.
either or.
Joan, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you.
It's very smooth. It's not obvious.
This way.
So, just if any of the committee members have comments.
Do any of the committee members have comments? Nope. Oh, there we go.
I'd just like to say whoever put the packet together did an excellent job. It is fully informative. I like the way that things are lined out or struck, and the highlights with the color, and more than anything, the full explanation of each proposal. So thank you, Laura, or whoever put it together.
Betsy and I put together the content, and then Rick Shop does an excellent job of making it look beautiful. So it's a group effort.
I'll have to agree with that. It was very easy to read as well, so thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay. Agenda item B, public comment. This item is provided for public comment pertaining to items on the agenda as well as items not on the agenda. However, the committee cannot take action on items not listed on the agenda. The CSLB welcomes public comment at any item on the agenda. It is the CSLB's intent to ask for public comment prior to committee taking action on any agenda. But for some reason, if we forget to ask for public comment on an agenda item, please, any member of the public desiring to comment on an item, raise their hand and we will recognize you. Also, we'd be limiting public comment to 5 minutes per individual. Are there any individuals who wish to address the committee at this time? And please state your name, please.
Good morning, Richard Markison, Pacific Advocacy Group. My clients would like to congratulate Mr. Fote on his selection as the new registrar, and also to the members of the board. We think that you've made an excellent decision and congratulate you on a new registrar who will hopefully be with you for many years. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
On? Okay. Hi, I'm Jeff Grins. I'm a local general contractor. I'll keep it under 5 minutes, but I've been in the business since '81, and I took a sabbatical the last few years as there wasn't a lot of building going on. I build new homes typically, but I recently got my license again. And just some of the issues that we've been watching, many of us read your bulletins that come out. We may not show up at these meetings, but we do read and think about these things. And I want to let you know that the test I took was probably more applicable to the business than most of the other state tests I take. It was good. It was clear. I bird dogged my application. It took about 111 days to get it done from application to finish. Some of the things that I see as things that might help the industry, because I think helping licensees also helps the consumer, is I look at the $500 limit. It's been around since I've had my license, probably. I think it was changed to 500 in the last Jerry Brown administration. The current misdemeanor limit is 950. That might be a good number to shoot for as a minimum. As a contractor, I mean, I don't even look at those level of jobs anyway, but I just think it's something that might be more consistent with our state misdemeanor laws. The down payment levels haven't changed for, oh my gosh, since before '98, I think. I came to the last meeting and I listened to the discussion. I know the staff and the people here didn't know how old those laws were, so I started looking. Probably the biggest thing that we're seeing out in the field right now, and I know that SWIFT in enforcement is very strong with a lot of the small contractors or unlicensees that work out there, but we see a lot of, if the flipping industry is gigantic in the real estate business, and I also hold my real estate broker's license. And when I stopped building and I started working in real estate, it was a little shocking to see the level of workmanship out there, because there's generally no permits pulled. And when there's no permits pulled, it generally means that there's no licensees. It means that there's cash. I see you're nodding your head. You see it. But when I was busy building, I wasn't paying attention to those things. When you start going out in the real estate world and you know what you're supposed to be looking at, and you see these things, our consumers are being given thousands of homes a year, new and resale, that are not being prepared by licensed contractors. These people in the flipping industry are also in the new home industry. I know by history that we went after the production builders 30 years ago to make them all become licensed instead of relying on their subcontractors. Those guys are now the good guys, and now you see a lot of it in higher-end spec homes, $500,000, $1.5 million, $2 million. A lot of owner builders out there. It's amazing the amount of owner builders out there. Where there's that, there's more. So I would just encourage you to look at those areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can I comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for coming. I hope you come back, and it would be really great if we had more individual building contractors, small building contractors that came to this meeting, because it's a huge percentage of the licensed folks in the state. And our industry, really, the small contractor, is really unfairly burdened by the things that you're talking about. And I just appreciate your being here, and I hope you can get some of your other colleagues, individual contractors, to show up at some of these meetings, because I think these points are really critical to not just contractors and leveling the playing field, but to homeowners that are being assuaged by people that are doing the work, receiving the same amount of money that a licensed contractor or subcontractor would more times than not receive, and they're not doing it by the law. So it's real critical that you come and encourage your fellow contractor colleagues to come as well. Thanks.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Go ahead.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. Phil Vermeulen, representing the Flasher Barricade Association Contractor Licensing Center. I'd be remiss, too, without congratulating Dave and congratulating the board. We've worked together since he was Chief of Enforcement since, what, 2000? long time, and we all know his caliber, and I'm looking forward to it, and my clients are too, so congratulations. On another point I want to make quickly, we all know the underground economy is running rampant. The staff had proposed a year ago, last December, if my memory serves me correct, in South San Francisco, a proposal to create another sub B2 classification, if I recall. I think we need to come back and revisit that, and that addresses a lot of what this gentleman is talking about. You know, we have so many people now that the requirements on becoming a B contractor are, you know, it's like trying to break up a fist fight using nuclear weapons. I think it's overkill. We need to realistically look at what we can do to try to reach out, try to level that playing field. There's too much under the table, too much non-workers' comp being paid, and we've got to be serious about addressing and trying to bring these people that are out in the fold out there into reality and into the mainstream. And my pledge is to work with all of you to try to come up with something, because we can't keep going the way it is. And we can't keep building fences trying to keep out all these people, because they're eating all the legitimate contractors' lunches. So with that, I look forward to working with you all and my colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you. Any comments?
Yeah, I do. Phil, that's a good point. A lot of we come up with a lot of ideas in here, and a lot of them are good ideas that kind of die on the vine over time for one reason or another. Other priorities step in, whatever it may be. And now we're into this economy where things are all heated up, and the underground economy is for some reason, it's fruitful when things are down, and it's more fruitful when things are up. And so maybe this is something we should put on an agenda item for the next meeting so that we can actually have a discourse, and maybe we can revisit how we're going to handle the handyman and the B2, or however we want to handle something that's a simple, like, I mean, we talked about it before, right, where it's a simple form they fill in, something simplified rather than the long drawn out 111-day B process that we're talking about.
Paul, are you talking about a committee meeting or the board meeting?
Well, I think we have to put it on as a committee. I think it would probably be better as a committee agenda first. I don't know. What do you think, Laura?
So as I recall, I think we dropped that specific proposal that Phil was talking about, which was a C1 classification. But I think the licensing committee, I think one of our strategic objectives is to still look at this issue maybe from a different perspective, whether it's the $500 limit or I think we dropped the idea of creating a new classification. But I'll go back and take a look and see what we had as an objective. But we can put the broader issue on the next licensing committee agenda, which is probably where we should start.
I think it's probably more a licensing issue, unless we want to do it as a full board deal in June. I don't know.
We probably could put it on the June board agenda to talk about. Kurt, would that be all right without going to the committee?
I think you could. I think the committee could recommend to the full board that consider the sub-B or the B contractors. Sure. I just want to kind of limit discussion since we're
sure. Okay.
Chair, this is the time to take other proposals for inclusion on the board meeting on the 15th and 16th, correct? This is our segment of time. So I would also like to have included a discussion on the housing crisis in California and what our board can do to help alleviate it. Just recently in the paper, the local Sacramento Bee, which there was an article about the number of bills introduced in the state, over 100, somewhere between 100 and 150 bills. So there's an all-out effort in our state to do something about this crisis, and we need to be a part of it. And so I would like to see that added to our agenda.
Sounds good. Okay. Any other comments from the board or the committee? It's not the board. Okay, let's go on to the next agenda item. Okay, review and discussion of possible action to recommend to the board the limit or initiation of rulemaking to amend Title 16 California Code of Regulations 16 CCR, sections 853, 858.1, 858.2, 869, 869.9, and 872. Renewal application form blanket performance and payment bond requirements, application for approval of blanket performance and payment bond, criteria for rehabilitation, criteria to aid in determining the earliest date a denied applicant may reapply for a licensure, and disclosure of general liability insurance. This proposed regulatory package makes some minor changes to our existing regulations. I'll turn this item over to Laura to present.
Thanks. I think the topic on the agenda kind of covers it all because it's so long. It tells you exactly what we're looking at. But these just make some minor changes to our existing regulations, either to conform to statutory changes in one case, to make it clear that the application and the renewal application fee need to come together. And you can see starting on page 6 of the packet, there's a chart that kind of explains each change. So we're also look on page starting on page 22, we're striking some information, but that's because it's contained elsewhere in the regulations already, so it's not as significant a change as it looks like. And see, does anyone have any questions?
Chair, if you could. Let's see. So, 2 questions. I personally think we've kind of hit a tipping point, which we started a while ago with getting email addresses for our constituents. And so, given the consequences of suspension and expiration of a license and what that means in 7031, and call them the bankruptcy events that they are, that I would recommend that we wherever it says mail in here, we make it clear that we mail it and we start emailing to the qualifier and the key personnel, that we start getting into the 20th century, and because we're getting there. I think we've done a good job of collecting email addresses. And in our renewal applications, I think we're asking for them now. And so at this point, let's just tip the card over and let's get the information as many ways as we can to the contractor so they get these notices that can put them out of business if they mess up.
So I would like us to be as technologically savvy. We don't take renewal, we don't take applications by email at this point. We take the workers' comp certificates. You can submit the bond information by email and electronic submission, but the applications themselves are submitted by mail or dropped off.
I was referring to the other way. In other words, the CSLB just sends the notices.
We send the email out.
Right. The email comes from the CSLB to the contractor saying exactly what we're mailing. Just whatever we mail, send it by email.
Send an email as well? Okay.
And then everything's the same coming back. I'm not suggesting a major change to our internal systems. I'm just saying how we send it. It's kind of simple. So anyway, that was one suggestion. So I don't know if we would present that.
I think we could do that without amending the regulations. I think we could just look at doing that, but we could certainly put it in here if you make it clear that that's our intention.
We'd want it someplace to make it clear that's the intention, and in particular to let the contractors know what we're doing, other than just by a newsletter, but put it in the regs, and it just gives them a place to go to say, okay, that's how this is happening now. And I can't tell you how much that would change, just that, in terms of getting out of, I know the Postal Service is wonderful, but it all doesn't get where it's supposed to go. But email is doing a much better job.
Would this present a problem with notice requirements? I mean, would it?
Well, I don't think the email would replace the mail at this point. So the mail would be meeting the notice requirements, the mail, because we rely on we rely on the postmark for evidence that it's submitted to us timely.
So we would do it in addition to?
It would be in addition to, right? Is that what you're suggesting, Paul?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I got out of it.
Absolutely, in addition to. That's, now the second, and again, I think key personnel and qualifier, and that relates to something back here that we're going to go over in a bit, where a qualifier can be out of the loop in things because the qualifier sometimes is not necessarily top management. And so something could go to top management and the qualifier is never aware of it. So if notices go to qualifiers and key personnel, then everybody's on the same page. That was my thought.
So you mean like renewal information, anything relating to the license maintenance should go to the personnel of record as well? Okay?
Yes. Yeah. Now, the other thing that I wanted to discuss is in paragraph C, there's a timing issue here. Again, if the consequences weren't so egregious, I'd say the heck with it, we don't even need to talk about it. But in paragraph C, we've got a timing issue where we say that the incomplete renewal application would be returned to a licensee by the registrar with an explanation of reasons for its rejection. So remember where we are, we're renewing an application. They send in the renewal form and it's incomplete. The CSLB sends back a notice saying, get it current, fix it thing. And you've got to fix it by the expiration date. Well, the dilemma with that is you've got a timing conundrum where if you submit your application in, your renewal application, and it's 3 days before your expiration date, then by the time you receive the notice from the CSLB that your application's got a deficiency, you're already beyond you've expired. So what I would suggest there, and again, it's just because of the consequences are so egregious, is maybe we could include like a 30-day period to respond. And so it'd be the later of 30 days after receipt or mail of the notice or expiration of your license.
So you want 30 days for the licensee to make any corrections to the renewal application if they submitted it timely.
If it's submitted timely, correct. And then that way so that way it gets rid of the timing problem, because there's nothing in here that says you have to submit your renewal application a month before. Right. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah.
No, you'd have to say the later of 30 days or expiration, because if they're really on top of it and they do it 2 months ahead of time, well, it can't be 30 days because then it would just expire. I don't know, it'd be confusing. So it's got to be the later of 30 days or the expiration date of your license.
For those rare few that send it in more than 30 days before their...
Which we all do. We all strive for that goal, I promise.
Okay. And I should know the answer to this, wearing my other hat in licensing, but I'm not thinking about that right now. So actually, Mike Jemnetsky, if you wouldn't mind coming up, how do we handle it now for anyone who submits it?
We actually have that.
Mike is one of the managers in licensing.
This definitely comes up with regularity, and I think we have an unwritten policy that executes your idea right now to give the additional window, the additional accommodation of the 30 days. So we are doing that because it becomes prejudicial, because you could literally get a correction letter in the mail. It says you need to correct this by the date of your expiration pursuant to statute, but you're holding it, and that's 3 days from the date that you need to correct it. So it's not fair. So, yep.
So my suggestion is really just codifying or putting it in writing so that we all know. Again, let the contractors know what we're really doing up front.
I think the existing 30-day grace period is just on the fee, not on the expiration.
It's on the delinquency fee, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so we may be doing perhaps more than we're authorized to do now. So we'll see what we can add to this language and talk to Kurt and to Christie and see what we can add.
Now, what does that require us to do now? Like a motion, a not a motion, a chit-chat? What's parliamentary procedure for this?
Part of the motion we had was to approve the proposed regulatory text as presented, and then we'd add with the amendments discussed at this meeting, if that's acceptable, Kurt, and then we could just work out the exact language? Is that acceptable? Okay.
Mr. Chair, Phil Vermeulen. Along those lines is the problem that you submit, and I've had this happen time and time again with contractors who submit their renewals or the workers' comp renewal or the bond renewal in time, and the staff has backed up because they've got so many applications they're trying to process. The problem is when the date of the expiration of that license comes, they're suspended, even though it's on the staff because of their staffing problems. And something has to be done where there has to just take the word suspension off of it. I've had contractors calling me crying because they've lost multi-million-dollar jobs because their license is suspended when they did submit it on time. It's along those lines, and it's a big problem. And it's, you know, the staff is really caught up on the workload right now, but it happens where all of a sudden they're inundated, all of a sudden we have a 6-week backlog, and even though the contractor did submit his renewals on time, he's suspended. And that's not right. So we have to address that too. You brought this up, so I wanted to mention that as well. Thank you.
Chair, if I could? One other thing?
Sure, certainly.
If I can?
Sure.
Perhaps it would, well, no, actually, I think Kurt needs to go first.
So, certainly, so my comments aren't on the merit, just on the procedure. So I think going forward, I essentially have, you could go through, recommend the board that they set this for hearing with sort of 3 conceptual amendments, and then we'd probably flesh out the language by the time we got to the board. The first one, Mr. Shafino, is your conceptual amendment, transmit to the licensee where practical electronically, I think, is where we're going, because if you don't have the email address, you may not have it. Then you had telling, providing a notice to more than just the licensee, perhaps the personnel of record. And the third one is the potentiality of putting like a 30-day floating window in for the renewal of the license, and that's what I have so far. So.
A floating, could you explain what you mean by floating window?
Sure. What I'm trying to suggest is there seems to be, the 30-day window would be, you have a hard date, which your license expires, you mail it in, we find that it's incomplete or erroneous, or you forgot to mail the check or something, then it was my understanding you wanted some sort of, kind of a floating 30-day following that.
Are we talking about an automatic grace period that would kick in if the licensee,
Perhaps.
applicant could
It demonstrates good
show due diligence and a real effort to have complied?
Actually, I don't think you'd have to show anything. In other words, if you submitted a renewal application and forgot to sign it, then it's when you get something back from the CSLB saying you didn't sign it, you don't have to prove anything. It's just an automatic 30-day grace period is what I would propose, that you have 30 days to sign it and get it back to them.
Basically, what we're proposing is putting in writing what staff's already doing.
Right.
I don't have a law book in front of me, but there's a couple of sections after the one at issue that we're discussing that talks about a licensee's objection in good faith to the rejection of the renewal for corrections, and allows the board to accept a good faith objection from a licensee who's been stymied by that period and to give them due consideration. So we're actually using that statute. Is it 7-1? Do you mind if I look at your?
7141.
Is that the one?
And then 7141.5. So if they've submitted it timely, but we haven't processed on time, we retroactively renew back to the date the license expired. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Actually, 7145. Just to clarify that we discussed using that statute as sort of our grounding for our unwritten policy to give some licensees some leeways on this. It's the second paragraph. We can consider that a licensee who has been up against that window of getting a correction and having to get it in within a couple of days, we can consider anyone who fits that criteria as automatically submitting a petition in good faith to have the board reconsider their renewal. It's the second paragraph of 7145. So we believe that we're operating within statute.
So we can put something in the regulations to make that clear?
I think so. If you want to codify your existing, I would actually wholeheartedly support that. Otherwise, we sort of had this underground regulation problem. I would say that 7145 looks like it requires a volitional act on the part of the licensee to petition, unless, I don't know how that works in the administrative realm within your processing, but I think what we have here is sort of the automatic, doesn't require any volitional act. We would just cover that by the regulation.
So these amendments, we can put them down and bring them to the board, or what?
That's, unless the committee would like to work it out right here, which may be impractical. So I would suggest that it's going forward, you would make the motion to recommend with these 3 conceptual amendments, the 30-day grace, the transmitting of electronic renewal notice where feasible, and also the wider distribution of the renewal information.
We need a motion for that.
So moved.
Second.
And I'll just read the motion for the record.
Certainly.
Okay. So the motion is to approve the proposed regulatory text as presented in the materials with the amendments discussed at this meeting to, 1, have CSLB email as well as mail information to licensees, 2, notify personnel of record as well as the qualifier, and 3, have a 30-day grace period for renewal corrections. And then to direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the registrar to take all necessary steps to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for hearing.
Hold on.
We need a roll call vote? Oh, yeah, public comment? Any more board comment? Anybody? Nothing? Okay, who does the roll call?
I'll do that. Dave Diaz?
Yes.
Joan Hancock?
Aye.
Ed Lang?
Yes.
Paul Shafino?
Yes. One other thing, Chair, if I could. Would it be, I don't know when the right time to bring this up, but could we put on the agenda the email, and this would be for the board meeting, I think it's a better place to do it, the email and emailing in addition to mail, and the second item we just discussed, to notifying the qualifier and all key personnel, really for all the regulations that currently require mail. In other words, wherever it says mail, let's just do it every which way. And so I think that is not really an agended item because it's global, so maybe we need to put it on an agenda?
So to add mailing to everyone, to the email, and then the mailing to all the personnel, to those 2 items.
Correct.
I think you can bring that up as a board agenda item next time around, do global reprice for board consideration at the next scheduled board meeting.
The June 15,
June
16? Yeah, okay.
It's always something. I think what I'm trying to follow on what Mr. Shafino said was that we can do that, the global distribution via email for the renewal form within this agendized item. But to do it globally throughout the regulation would require, I think, the board to consider that as a standing alone item at its next board meeting. That's all.
Do we have to vote on that?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
All you're doing is putting it on the agenda.
Correct, that's what I thought. D.
Yes.
Okay. See, review, discussion, and possible action on 2017 legislation. AB 710 Wood, Department of Consumer Affairs Board meetings. This bill requires to meet in at least once every year or every other year in a rural Northern California, I recommend it somewhere we can go fishing, so.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I hate to be a wet blanket. In the board motion, I'm gonna get a paperweight and put it right there. I apologize, members and attendees. I'm sorry, did we, with that motion, did we also want to cover the other regulatory sections? Do they discover, did the board wrap it all up and also tackle the bonds and the general insurance as well?
I think that was all in the motion of the
Okay.
proposed regulatory text.
I apologize.
Thank you, good job. So we're gonna make a motion to go somewhere like
Just
Klamath
curious,
River?
were you in agreement with what he just said, Paul? That was an all-inclusive motion that we, I just want to make sure before we move on.
Like I said, Ms. Hancock, I just want to make sure that there was no other discussion either from the public or among the board member, committee members themselves about the balance of the regulatory endeavor, that's all.
So just to be clear, we were dealing with 850, so the regulatory endeavor, that's 853, 858.1, 58.2, 69, 69.9, and 72. Right, we're dealing with the whole kit and caboodle. All right, could.
Plus your amendment.
Give me just 1 second. Just give me a sec. All right,
I need a minute, too.
I'm such a pain in the neck. All right,
No,
I'm
you're
gonna-
not.
I'm going to bring up one thing. And I don't know if there's anything to do about this, but are we just open to discussion about, okay, page 25. And I'm just saying, and I'm throwing this out there. Contractors, I'm reading at the top of the page, a couple lines down. Contractors building single-family residence for owners who intend to occupy the home for at least a year are required by law to tell you whether or not they carry commercial general liability insurance. Contractors building single-family homes for owners who intend to occupy the home for at least a year. How the heck do we know if they intend to occupy the home for a year? Are we supposed to send them a letter saying, please sign below? So I looked at that, and here's what I did in my business, sharing as a contractor. I won't build homes I won't work for an owner. I just skip it because it's too complicated. There's too many rules in dealing with an owner where I just say, sorry, I absolutely will not work for owners. It's too complicated. There's too many ways that I look at all this stuff and go, there's too many sand traps where I'm concerned, I'm worried.
You want to know how we verify this?
How's a contractor
How's the contract?
supposed
The contractor's supposed to verify it is the way I'm reading this. In other words, the contractor only needs to provide all this language if the owner intends to occupy the home for at least a year. Otherwise, they don't have to do all this.
Right.
What is
I
this
think they take their
addressing?
word for it, I'm not
Where
sure.
did this come from, and what is it addressing?
Well, it's existing language. I think it's, let me see what the authority section is. 7164 is the BMP code, so it's existing language. It's in the home improvement contract, I believe.
If you look on page 446, page 446 of your playbook there.
Mr. Chair, while they're looking, when I read this, it seemed like it's on the consumer, the homeowner obligation to have it filled out by the contractor. It's the onus is put on the contractor to fill it out. And if he is not telling the truth, I think the burden is on him. That's why I read it the first time. Maybe that's...
Well, the way the solution to it would be is that whether you intend to occupy it for a year or not, just do this every time. And that way you get rid of that whole debate of law in front of a judge going, what did he tell you, what didn't he, did you get something in writing, did you not? Candidly, I look at that and I go, just, if you want to require it, which, okay, just require it. Put in the GL language. I don't know.
I think what this is just modeling what's in statute, right? That's what statute requires us to do, is to provide it with that language.
We're not changing the statute, so never mind.
Right. I mean, I think
That makes that easy.
yeah. I would imagine in reality, they do what you suggest. They just,
With that said, then, I'm good with that we did, the motion is exactly what Kurt was saying. It's, for me, it covered everything in the regulatory umbrella.
But back to what you were saying, though, is the onus on the homeowner? Because he has to get this filled out. You don't read it that way, okay?
Well, the next page actually indicates that it is required for LLCs, right? And optional for sole ownership, so it kind of contradicts itself.
Oh, it's a mess, but.
It's a mess, huh?
yeah, the liability insurance is required for LLCs under our law, but not for any other licensees. It's not clear.
I remember when we did this. I remember when we discussed this last year, but it may just be the wording here introducing this. It's obviously, it has to do with warranty, right? And liability in the event of within a year.
The question would go back to Laura of, if we're looking at this as a board saying, yeah, we're contractors, and I'm looking at it going, what? Then, trust me, everybody else is. And so, do we have an incentive or a reason as a board to look at this right now, today, or not, to say, can we clean this thing up to have it make some sense?
I don't think we could clean it up in regulation. Betsy, do you think that's accurate? It can go into our larger project of trying to make the law more understandable and better organized, which I think the next legislative chief will carry on that task that I've been working on.
I don't know, it may just be harmless. It's basically indicating whether you do or do not have a liability policy, right? A PL and PD. Isn't that all it is? And
Right, it's intended to be a notification to the consumer about the contractor's liability. That's why on page 26, it's a Q&A. So on page 26, it says, is this insurance required? And the answer used to be no, because we didn't have a liability insurance requirement. But now it does say it's required for LLCs, because LLCs do have to have it, but then it's optional for others.
I mean, the notice is good in a way because it would give a owner, because it's single-family residence, the option of buying their own policy, right? A rider attached to their, a homeowner policy to cover defects. You know, they found some lowballer contractor out there that, you know, doesn't carry this, and they want to go with the lowballer no matter what. I don't, what are you going to say, Mr.?
So, Mr. Chair, a little history on this. I was the dirty dog on behalf of my clients that introduced this legislation back in '95 or whenever it was, way back in the '90s. And we tried to mandate general liability insurance, saying anybody that's a contractor is out of their minds if they don't have liability insurance to protect the consumer. It was a good consumer bill type of a thing. Well, unfortunately, in politics and dealing in the Capitol, everything has to be a compromise. And the insurance companies beat up on me because their fear was that the responsible contractors know the importance of having general liability insurance and will go out and get a policy. The other, whatever percentage are out there, are not going to get it. And the fear of the insurance companies was we were going to have another state fund created for general liability insurance. And they said, you know, we like it just the way it is. We like to be able to cherry pick to have the legitimate contractors who are worthy enough to go out and get the policy. So that's what happened here. So the compromise was it's not a mandatory. It's if you carry general liability insurance, Mr. Home Improvement Contractor, you're going to disclose your policy and your information. It's, again, a compromise at best. It's not the best of all worlds. It was better than nothing, but obviously, if we had our druthers, to this day, we demand general liability policy just like we do with workers' comp, and we know how successful we are on that one. So,
I mean, maybe that would be something that would be important to a contractor that did, you know, over a certain amount of dollar work every year, but you get contractors that are semi-retired. They're going to do small jobs, and maybe they're not risk jobs, high-risk jobs. That, you know, that kind of plays into it. I don't know. I hope we're not getting out in the weeds here.
It's a good thing to debate. We can talk about it for a long time, but, you know, that's the genesis of this whole thing, and sorry, folks, I tried.
Candidly, I'm okay moving on. I just had to, I just read it and went, what? And so that actually does explain where it comes from, but I'm okay moving on. I don't think so. Yeah, right. What are we going to do with it? I don't think there's anything we can do with it. It's statute, and we're not going to change statute, so unless we're ready to, Lori's very tactfully punting to the next person in charge of ledge.
I'm ready. I don't know if anyone else is ready to go forward with it. Yeah.
Well, we've already had the motion and voted and everything else, so are we just going to stay with it?
I'm okay staying with it.
Yeah, I think we can put this issue on a future legislative committee agenda when we're looking at legislative proposals for 2018, if we want to look at cleanup here or anywhere else. Okay.
Like a strategic item, one of those things. Great.
All righty. We're back on AB 710. We have any board comments for that, besides going to Klamath River?
I will add, this bill is pretty minimal on details, and it may be intended to address something else. It might be considered a spot bill and might be amended for a different purpose, so I would just bring it back to the board if it gets amended.
I would be willing to bet that Assembly Member Wood lives in rural Northern California. That's my thought.
It's a good guess.
I have one question on this, and there's probably nothing we can do about this, but down at the bottom, the intent of it is to, in the outlying areas, to have people come and attend. If you look at the last paragraph, that's in quote, this will ensure that our rural communities have a fair opportunity to be present and have their voices heard. That's the only thing I would add in that, because if you don't, the intent would be, oh, I can watch it on TV then. You know, they're not there, but they're, you know. So I think the word "to be present" would be good, yeah.
Okay.
It's a watch anyway, yeah.
Yeah, but we're not going to change the wording.
No, but the intent is not there, you know,
Right,
the intent is
okay.
to have them present.
Yeah, just,
That's-
just providing the meeting and location doesn't mean that anyone's going to come. And,
There
Right.
you go,
Yeah.
there you go.
Depends on if the salmon are running or not.
Yeah.
Okay, see, does anybody from the public have a comment on this item? Hearing none, do I get a motion somewhere to watch it?
Do you generally use motions for watch position?
we can all, I think we've done it both ways.
That's fine.
Might as well be safe.
So moved.
Okay,
Call the roll.
roll call, please.
Dave Diaz,
Yes.
Joan Hancock, Ed Lang,
Yes.
Paul Shafino.
Yes.
Okay, AB 996, Cunningham, Contractors License Board website search function. This bill requires additional information to be disclosed on the CSLB website regarding the process of workers' compensation. While the analysis has an opposed recommendation, the staff is suggesting instead to watch a watch position. They are currently in discussion with the sponsor on amendments. And did you give us something else on
I
this?
would just
or-
add, I didn't have the analysis in the packet, hoping I would be able to change it for amendment. So it's a handout here, so you have it in front of you. Right now, I mean, the bill is, the way it's drafted, the board can't technically comply with it. It doesn't, it references documents that don't exist and references steps in a process that also doesn't exist. So we have talked to the sponsor. They would just like more information about how we process workers' compensation, what the reasons for the backlogs are. So we're working with the sponsor now on amendments, so that's why I'm suggesting we just watch the bill and see if we can get it to a point where we can
So
reach
moved.
consensus.
Second.
Okay, whoops. Anybody from the public have a comment on this? You're getting your steps in today.
No, sorry, folks. This goes back to what I was saying earlier, only I wanted to go beyond just workers' comp. It's everything, renewals, workers' comp renewals, bond renewals. If you get it in on time and the date passes for your expiration, but it's stamped and it shows, because what it'll say on the website now for the license board, received but not yet processed, and then below that it'll say suspended. Well, that's nuts. If they had it in on time, take out the word suspended, it solves the problems, because they did in good faith get it in on time, whether it's workers' comp, the bond, or your renewal. And so unfortunately, this bill doesn't go very far. It's going to die in suspense anyway, and that's the end of the story on this one, because it's too expensive. But it goes back to my comments of before. We have to address this problem. It's serious. And all it would take the word suspended off the license if they received it on time. Does that make sense? Thanks.
So we added the other bill that he's talking about, that we all talked about, as a agenda item. Can we not just add this to it at the same time, or unless it's dead by the time?
This bill is, I will know next week.
So if I can ask for clarification on what you're talking about, Joan. So what Phil is suggesting is something he's mentioned before. It's not something the board has the authority to do under existing law. So it would require a more comprehensive change to do what Phil is suggesting. It's not simply something that we could change the way we post workers' compensation or how we process renewals. So it would be a broader discussion area and, a more significant policy change. So we could put it on a future agenda if the board is interested in it.
Could I ask a question or help? What Joan, the way I'm looking at it is, Joan, you're saying the other was a regulation, and in a regulation, we can propose it and we can actually do something about it directly. In this one, we're talking about a statute, which has to go through the Assembly and the Senate. It's got to be voted on. It's much more complicated, and it's kind of a different animal. And so what Laura's suggesting is, do we want to approach that different animal here, or can we do something like that in regulation?
I don't think we could do that in regulation. I think staff would have to look at it more, but the issue that's being raised is that some people would like us, if we've received the workers' comp, they want the license to stay in good standing. But the law requires us to have a valid certificate on file, and until we know if it's valid, we can't consider the license to be in good standing. So it's not simply a matter of saying it's received, the license is good standing, then we process it, realize it's deficient, and then we have to take it off good standing, and the law doesn't allow us to do that. So the legislature has made it clear that they want workers' compensation to be on file at all times for licensees in order to maintain their license, and a function of that is if the board hasn't received an acceptable certificate by the time the old one's expired, the license is going to go into suspension.
And if I could ask, Phil, what were you mentioning then? Why would that to me makes complete sense. In other words, if the contractors can't get their workers' comp certificate in on time, they blew it.
Yeah, but the problem is that, let's take state fund, because they're the 500-pound gorilla, right? They don't issue the policy until a couple of days before expiration. So there isn't any wiggle room. And so for the vast majority of contractors who are getting their workers' comp through state fund, they're proverbially, what's that word, I mean, they're stuck. There has to be a way that we can accommodate, because the contractor's in a catch-22 situation here.
We notify licensees at the time the workers' comp is on file, that the certificate on file is expired. We give them 30 days at this point to submit a new one. So we don't actually suspend the license until 30 days after the old one has expired. If we don't have a new one on file after the end of that 30 days, we do suspend retroactively back to the date the workers' comp expired. But we do essentially provide a 30-day grace period for them to get it in, and the license still shows in good standing. So the law, our existing practice covers what you're talking about.
Is that in regulation someplace, or is that just normal SOP, standard operating procedure?
The latter.
So I'm getting calls from brokers all the time and contractors, and the brokers are telling me it's state fund, that they have submitted the policy on time, and it's just the processing time, and then it's showing suspended on the license. So
in my other hat in licensing, this is something we spent quite a bit of time on. Earlier this year, we were backlogged in the processing of workers' compensation certificates. We are not currently. But we found out when we would get these complaints, Mike Jemnetsky and I would take the complaints from brokers and licensees, and when we would do the research, the vast majority of the time, people were not submitting the certificates until 30 days after the old one expired, and then 25% of the time they're deficient. So if people aren't complying timely, the license is going to go into suspension.
Hold on, right here. Actually, we're getting off track right now. This is about just the website and putting workers' comp on there, not all this other stuff. So let's get this back in order.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion to watch, and then we have a second.
We do have a second from Ed.
Okay.
Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Joan Hancock. Ed Lang.
Aye.
Paul Shafino.
Aye.
All right. Moving on. AB 1005, professions and vocations fines relief. This bill requires non-health boards to provide 30-day abatement period for all citations with a fine. Okay, you want to explain that?
Sure. So I'm not actually quite sure what the intent of this bill is, but it applies to all non-health boards, so that includes CSLB, saying that whenever we issue a citation that has a fine attached to it, we would need to give the licensees a 30-day period in which to abate the behavior that led to the citation and fine. At this point, staff isn't quite sure how we could practically comply with this. It also, the bill's in an Assembly Appropriations Committee and has a significant fiscal estimate of over $4 million for loss in revenue to the special funds. So CSLB would be a significant amount of that loss in revenue. So we're recommending an opposed position.
Okay, does anybody from board members have comments?
Could you, Dave, if you could, give me a couple examples of what an administrative fine looks like?
Sure. We're referring to administrative citations that are issued generally when we have somebody that's engaged in repeated acts. We've issued them a warning letter, and they're continuing to create the same violation. A permit being a good example, they're not obtaining a building permit. We would issue a citation. The citation has a civil penalty. We have the authority to issue civil penalties up to $5,000 to licensees. We recently ran our numbers to see what our average civil penalty is. It's about $1,500 on average for a citation. But it does serve as a penalty. It doesn't offset the cost of issuing the citation and handling the appeals. The appeal, if it goes to hearing, costs the board over $9,000. I would just throw out, though, that there's another legislative proposal that, if chaptered by the governor, would allow us to issue a letter of admonishment. And that would be very effective when we don't need to issue a citation. But when we do issue a citation, it's for something we consider to be so serious, meaning it's a repeated act, or we have a contractor that's engaged in activity that caused significant financial harm to a consumer.
Okay, that actually helps me, so thank you.
Okay, let's see, anybody from the public? No. Do we have a motion? Let's see, oops, I'm back up the wrong one. Do we have a motion to oppose?
So moved. Second.
Okay. Roll call.
Dave Diaz?
Yes.
Joan Hancock? Ed Lang?
Aye.
Paul Shapino?
Aye. Before we proceed, we just make sure there's no public comment on.
Thank you.
Okay, any public comment on this item? No. Okay, going off, AB 1070, Gonzalez Contractors. This bill requires CSLB to create and provide solar energy system disclosure contract. Are there any board comments?
I have a comment, and maybe I'd just like to know, it put a lot of emphasis on the consumer, and I'm looking at the seniors mostly here, is that says they have cooling off period of 3 days. Has there been any rash of complaints from seniors indicating that they replied within 3 days and they were refused by the contractor? I'm just curious, because all through here it's you got a cooling off period.
Right, and I think the cooling off period exists under current law. David, can you talk about the complaints that we've received?
Sure. We are receiving consumer complaints regarding solar contracts where consumers are complaining that they didn't receive the written form of the contract. They didn't have a contract and didn't understand that they had the 3-day right to rescind. It's not, I would say, a widespread problem. It is happening. We're working very closely with the industry to make sure that when they use DocuSign or some electronic means of executing the contract, that they confirm that the consumer did receive the hard copy and did receive the 3-day right to rescind. If the work begins prior to the consumer receiving that written form of the contract, it's grounds for disciplinary action, and we are taking disciplinary action as contractors that can't provide verification that the customer did receive that document.
On this bill, I just want to add, I'm sorry, Ed. Okay. The bill requires CSLB to develop the document. It requires the Department of Consumer Affairs to receive and investigate complaints on this issue, which it seems like that might be more appropriately located at CSLB, as we have jurisdiction over the contractors, and it's not a function DCA currently performs. So I know the solar industry is working with the author on this proposal, and so we made some kind of technical comments to the author's office at this point. So I think there's still probably further amendments to come if the bill moves out of its committee.
Any other committee comments? Any public comment? Is there a motion to adopt a watch?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you.
Any public
Any-
comment on the motion? Dave Diaz?
Yes.
Joan Hancock? Yes. Ed Lang? Paul Shafino?
That was, okay. Yep, I went the wrong way, okay. AB 1162, oh boy. Like,
Want me to read it?
how do you say that name?
Oh, Assemblymember Bocanegra.
Okay, you go for it.
This is about electrical contractors. It requires C10 contractors to certify when applying for a building permit that he or she is in compliance with the existing electrician certification requirements. Just have a watch recommendation on this bill. It doesn't impact the board directly. I think I do have a comment. I'm not sure how the licensee is going to know whether they're subject to any kind of investigation by the labor agency. I don't think they're always going to know that, but again, it's outside of our jurisdiction.
Board member comments, or committee member comments, whatever we want to call them. We're not on the board, we're the committee, so yeah.
There you go. State's electrical certification law, just for clarification, that's not what we do. That has nothing to do with licensing. There's a
Right.
separate
The
certification thing
certification
out
is
there.
separate, yes, I know that.
Okay.
So are we being asked to adopt the certification criteria as part of the,
No. So the employees of C10 contractors have to be certified by DLSC, Division of Labor Standards Enforcement. They can be subject, the C10 contractors can be subject to discipline if they don't follow those requirements. But this bill isn't requiring us to do anything new. I just put it on the agenda more so you'd know that there's an impact on our licensees by another state agency.
and the impact being?
That they need to put additional information about their compliance when they're submitting bids as to whether or not they're in compliance with the certification requirement.
Which has nothing to do with
So
us.
but doesn't that go back to your question? How are they going to know whether they're in compliance or not?
So the bill says that the licensee needs to state in a permit application, there are no grounds for disciplinary action for violations of the electrician certification requirement. We're not enforcing the electrician certification requirement. I don't know practically, though, how a licensee would be able to state that they're not subject to any grounds for disciplinary action. CSLB licensees aren't always going to know that. So I don't know. Practically, I don't know how it's going to be implemented or enforced, but.
But to be clear, it's just not our problem.
Public comment?
Richard Markison for the Western Electrical Contractors Association. I think Ms. Zuniga is correct. It does present a conundrum for a contractor to have to certify that there are no grounds for discipline. For instance, the electrician certification law allows for a trainee. A trainee has to be progressing through a series of instruction, and it's going to be very difficult for the contractor to know if that trainee is actually progressing, but that would be grounds for discipline if they had a trainee on the job who were not taking their classes or proceeding through the classes. We've suggested some alternative language, and we are hopeful that Mr. Bocanegra will accede to that. So far, we haven't gotten any indication that the sponsors of the bill are interested in any changes, since they are the all-knowing expert on anything to do with the certification law. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment right now? None. Is there a motion to adopt a watch recommendation? Okay, we got a motion, a second? Second. Okay. And any other public comment on the motion?
Okay, Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Joan Hancock.
Yes.
Ed Lang.
Yes.
Paul Shafino.
Yes.
The next one is AB 1190 by Assemblymember Obernolte. It requires the Department of Consumer Affairs to quarterly post information online about the Breeze IT system. I think all the committee members are familiar with Breeze. So this is requiring additional information. The legislature is still quite interested in what will happen with what are considered the Phase 3 boards, which include CSLB, who are not currently included in Breeze. Are there any comments or questions from the committee members? Anything from the public? Okay. And is there a motion
To watch.
to watch?
So moved.
Any public comment? Okay. Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Joan Hancock.
Yes.
Ed Lang.
Yes.
Paul Shafino. Next one is AB 1278 by Assemblymember Lowe. It's regarding final judgments against our licensees. It makes changes to CSLB's current process for suspending licenses related to unsatisfied final judgments. I will just add, this bill is, I think, still a work in progress. I and other staff have been spending quite a bit of time working with the Assembly Judiciary Consultant on this bill to try to kind of try to come up with amendments to reflect what the intent of the author and sponsor are, and it's probably a bit more challenging than we first anticipated. So the recommended position here is support if amended, and that would be to amend the bill to make it clear that CSLB could impose a suspension on the license of the entity that's subject to the final judgment, as well as to the licenses of any qualifier who was associated with that original license, so to suspend any related licenses that qualifier might have, even if the qualifier disassociates before the judgment is final.
So is it ready for support if amended, or should we move to a watch position? in
Really
your
leave that up
mind?
to the committee. So it's still, I think, a work in progress. I don't think the language does exactly what they want it to do yet.
Does the amendment?
We've got several versions of amendments kind of that are in progress. It's,
Move to watch.
Comments.
Yeah, comments first.
I just got trumped.
Ooh.
Could we add an amendment in here? When you say support if amended, one of my concerns in here relates to my comment earlier, where if you have management as separate from the qualifier, it's possible to have a judgment the qualifier has no knowledge of. And so is there a system in here where we could include in this as amended to say, we're going to send out an email or a notice, or we're going to do something as CSLB to make sure everyone knows what's going on here, because a qualifier might not be in the loop?
so when CSLB receives notice of a final judgment, I think we do send notice to the qualifier and the personnel of record. CSLB's current practice, when we receive a final judgment, we suspend the license of the entities subject to the final judgment, as well as any other licenses for that qualifier or for the personnel of record. So we will notify all people.
And so then my suggestion would just be we also do that by email in addition to mail. That's all I'm really trying to get to. And do that as part of the if amended. And I understand it's a work in progress, so I mean, I think back to Joan, it's really just a watch, but I would suggest that go into the amendments.
Public comment?
Thank you. Richard Markison. Actually, my clients, contractor clients, agree with Ms. Zuniga's concerns, and I think it would be helpful for the dialogue and to protecting the interests of the contractors that the suspension be after all of the disciplinary process and the appeal have expired, if the board were to take a supportive amended or an opposed unless amended position, because your board is greatly respected in both the legislature and in the industry, and I think it would be helpful to have their input in resolving the questions that remain on the bill. You have an author who's doesn't have a lot of experience in contractor issues, and so I think your guidance and advice in that regard would help the bill and help the industry ultimately.
I think if Joan withdrew her motion to watch, I would move to support as amended. I think that's a good idea, actually.
Withdrawn.
So there are sort of two issues with this bill. One is what Mr. Markison talked about, which is ensuring that the judgment is final before we suspend the license, which is CSLB's current practice. And I think we've committed to continuing with that practice, so we can make that part of the recommended position. And then the other issue is to try to get at the people who disassociate from a license before the judgment is final. And that's, I think, where the sticking point is in drafting the language as to how we accomplish that, because this is a process it's not an investigatory process. When the suspension is, when we receive notice of the judgment, the license is suspended, and it's just purely a technical process. We don't do any type of investigation or determine who is at fault. So that's sort of the challenge, to try to go after the people who might disassociate.
And then we have the third, Mr. Shafino. So there's one, the final judgment. Two is, how do we craft it to reach those people who potentially disassociate? And three, providing electronic notice where feasible to everyone involved, so.
So can we move
forward
as amended?
Second.
Any other public comment?
I would, Chair, suggest that maybe you would ask Mr. Shafino to work with Laura and staff, if he's willing on this, to come up with the language that seems, so we're still in the loop about it.
Sure, if you're willing. We spent many hours on this, so I'd appreciate any additional assistance.
I would love to.
Thank you. Okay. Dave Diaz.
Yeah, yes.
Joan Hancock.
Aye.
Ed Lang.
Yes.
Paul Shafino.
Yes.
The next one is AB 1357 by Assemblymember Chu, relating to home inspections and roofing contractors. And so this bill would allow C39 licensees to perform repairs resulting from a roof inspection that they performed under specific conditions. There is amended bill text available as a handout. It doesn't really change the analysis, but I did provide it to you. This bill doesn't really directly impact CSLB again, but it does impact our licensees, which is why it was put on the agenda. Have any questions from committee members?
Yeah, so right now, what it's indicating is that there's a conflict of interest when the home inspector's roofer is entangled in the process, and we're trying to detangle that conflict, potential conflict, by...
Right, they're trying to allow for that to happen, to perform some repairs when they're involved in the inspection. So the home inspection provisions are at the end of our statute, but we don't really enforce them, so we're not directly impacted by this. But Rick, did you have a comment?
Well, as I read through the bill, I believe right now the roofers are not allowed to do the work if they did the roofing inspection. They're not allowed to do any of the work on the home itself. So I think this would just change and allow them in some cases to do the roof repairs even if they inspected it.
Eliminates that presumed conflict.
Yeah.
Move to maintain the watch.
Second.
Public comment?
Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Joan Hancock.
Aye.
Ed Lang.
Aye.
Paul Shafino.
Aye.
Okay. Next one, SB 27 by Senator Morrell. This bill requires boards within the Department of Consumer Affairs to waive the initial license fee for honorably discharged service members. There was a similar bill last year. The board supported that one, and so staff is again recommending a support position on this bill. Are there any questions from committee members?
Did that bill term out, or what happened?
It was not successful. I think it was held on in the Appropriations Committee due to cost concerns. So it's possible this one will have that same.
And this is a
end result.
one-time fee waiver?
It is a one-time fee waiver. It's a waiver for, I think, the license and the application fee, but you could only get it one time. But there is also no time limit as to how long it is from when you're discharged to when you could get the waiver.
There's no time limit?
Right, so for someone who was discharged 20 years ago and is now applying for a contractor's license, they would be eligible.
Should we consider amending it?
I know
Support to, if
the author wasn't
amended?
interested in putting a limit in there, just, I would guess maybe the more limitations you put on it, maybe the harder it could be to practically implement it, but
Yeah.
we don't know exactly how many of our licensees or applicants this could impact, but we could absorb the cost, we're fairly certain. And the legislature's been interested in doing more for service members, as members are aware.
All right, motion to support.
Second.
Any comments?
Public comments?
Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Joan Hancock. Ed Lang.
Aye.
Paul Shafino.
Aye.
Okay. The next one is SB 486, which we actually don't need to vote on. The board voted on this at the last board meeting. This is our sponsored bill about the letter of admonishment, so I just put that in there as an informational update.
Okay.
So the next item is SB 715 by Senator Newman. It's about board members. So it is,
87.
thank you, 87. So under existing law, the governor is authorized to remove from office board members that he or she appoints on specific grounds, and this bill would add failure to attend board meetings as a reason that a board member could be removed from office.
As long as it's understood that it's not a physical presence. Some of our board members have trouble getting to some of our meetings. I would support that.
I think it would be clear as long as that they're counted as being present when we're doing the board meeting, and that would include the teleconference locations or the video conferencing when we do that.
Yeah,
They're
those,
considered as attending.
that's considered being there, in my eyes. Yeah, yeah.
So,
Mr. Chair, I move to accept.
any questions? Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Joan Hancock. Yes. Ed Lang.
Aye.
Paul Shafino.
Aye.
The next one is SB 721 by Senator Hill. This one, you do have a handout with amended text and a new analysis as the bill was rewritten this week. That was enjoyable yesterday. So SB 721 is a follow-up to Senator Hill's legislation last year, SB 465, on the settlement reporting issue, and this stems from the accident in Berkeley with the balcony collapse. So what the author is trying to do is get certain types of buildings that have these elevated exterior structures to be inspected. So the bill specifies inspection requirements that would happen at the local level. It's the responsibility of the building owner to have the inspections performed and any repairs that need to be made. It allows the building owner to be cited by the local jurisdiction if repairs are not made. I'm recommending a watch position on this because the bill doesn't directly impact CSLB. The bill does place the requirements within CSLB statute, which I think is somewhat problematic, and I've suggested to the author's office that they place it elsewhere because CSLB is not going to enforce this, and I'd like it to be clear that CSLB has no ability to enforce this. We have no authority over building owners. But I've made that suggestion to the author's office, so that's purely really a technical concern. Otherwise, it's not something we're going to implement or enforce, which is why I have a watch recommendation.
Do we know, who is the enforcement agency on this?
So the bill refers to local enforcement agencies, so I think it's
Fire safety?
yeah, I think
I mean,
however it's
I'm-
done at the local level. This will be a good one maybe to talk about at our next board meeting when Nancy Springer is able to attend with her experience as a building inspector. I think it varies by jurisdiction.
Right, or might be the local building department or whatever.
It is somewhat difficult to establish a
either.
state standard for local inspections. But
I don't get it.
It's almost like the elevator check.
yeah.
And then somebody comes to check it.
Somebody cuts a cable, it goes down fast.
Is there any other?
Well, just one, I mean, why aren't we just opposing it? Because why is this under our, why do we have anything to, why are they putting it? I mean, I don't, it's a good idea. It's
Yeah.
just why it's under our purview in any way, shape, or form. I'm just looking at it going, why, you don't think we should oppose it?
Well, I think the board works fairly well with Senator Hill, and, you know,
He does, he's helped us, hasn't he?
Yeah.
All right, I'm in.
Okay.
Watch.
try to say that diplomatically.
That's it. So moved.
Okay. Any public comment? Okay, Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Joan Hancock. Yes. Ed Lang.
Yes.
Paul Shafino.
Yes.
Okay, last one, SB 800. This is a bill by the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee. It contains a lot of provisions, but it has two related to CSLB that we voted to sponsor. So this is, the board approved them at the December board meeting. There are two technical changes to our law, as outlined in the analysis. So just asking for a support position from the committee today.
Could you explain what this actually says? Just clarify for me.
Sure. So under existing law, that was added when LLCs were authorized under a statute, it allowed for the reassignment of a license number to a corporation or an LLC when the new entity acquires a licensee in an asset sale. But practically, we haven't been able to implement that language because a license is not something you can acquire in an asset sale. So we're just striking that language because it's confusing for people who try to use it and we can't apply it.
So we've never really, so in the acquisition world, we don't transfer licenses, but that just doesn't happen.
Correct.
Okay, I understand.
And then the second change is to use the correct term in our law for federal employer identification number and to add individual taxpayer identification number as authorized by Business and Professions Code, Section 30, I believe. So it's just to conform our statute with changes to the general provisions.
So it's a support position that you're requesting, so moved?
Any comments? All right. Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Jonah Hancock.
Yes.
Ed Lang.
Yes.
Paul Shafino.
Yes.
Okay.
We need a motion to-
Before we adjourn, Chair, could you read back the proposed agenda items for, that we suggested here for the
board
next
meeting?
meeting? Yeah, for the board meeting.
Sure. Bear with me a minute as my notes are a little bit messy. See, so a future board agenda item from Mr. Shafino is to add emailing items and mailing to all personnel. So to one, email documents that we mail, and then to mail documents, or I suppose email as well, to the personnel of record as well as the qualifier. So I think we would just go through the statute and find when that's applicable, but see if the board wants to go in that direction. I think we had one additional item. We talked about making a strategic goal for the legislative committee for the next year, or when we review the 2018 legislative proposals, changes to the provisions we talked about in the regulations about the general liability insurance notification requirements. So that'll go on a future legislative committee agenda. The prior one was for a board agenda. And I think that is all I have.
And I proposed the housing shortage
Oh,
crisis
yes, I'm sorry, that was in the
issue.
introduction. Yes, and what the board could do to help address the housing
Shortage
shortage.
crisis.
Okay, so we have two board items and one committee item for future.
And one other note of clarification, if we could. So, Laura, if it's okay with the chair, would it be possible to include me on what the rewrite looks like for 853, the regulation? And so that I can just participate in that process of what you come up with? I think you were going to rewrite it? Was it-
Yes.
Okay.
Right,
and
separate from this language, yes.
Right, and then what was the other one you were going to include me on?
AB 1278.
Nice. All right, there
for
you go.
judgments.
1278, my favorite.
Any other thing before entertain a motion to adjourn? Do we have one? Second?
Okay, Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Joan Hancock. Ed Lang.
Aye.
Paul Shafino. Okay.